Making sure that the YouTubes is up. Man,
Okay.
2 weeks is way too long.
For what? Between?
Yeah, between.
gotta gotta vent. Oh shit, he vented.
Alright, I think we're in the clear. Get started anyways. I don't know. For today, I didn't have too much that I wanted to go by in terms of structure. Figured it'd just be like a I have a bunch of blobs of bullet points like on the outline for today, and we just go by whatever. I don't know. When you think depression, what are you thinking of? What kind
Uh
of memories are triggered for you?
oh, memories or like you want my own
Anything.
definition?
When you're given the word, what comes to mind? What kind of rants do you have?
Helplessness. Um Numbness. Um Kind of like you don't want to get out of bed. Kind of I think helplessness is a really good word to describe it.
Right.
Um Not specifically learned helplessness, but more un unchangeable
Why would you say it's a
helplessness
better word?
than
Like a
depression.
good word
Um,
to describe depression, anyhow.
because sometimes it feels like you can't get help, be helped, or help yourself, and I think that's like the uniting word is help in that case.
Okay.
So if you're helpless, it's by all forms or meanings of the word.
All right. Yeah, I think a common experience would be the helplessness feeling. I don't know if the not able to get out of bed, though I think I've definitely experienced that too. But I don't know if like would you say a lot of people have like troubles getting out of bed when they're struggling with depression?
Uh, it's
I
one
guess
of
I'm
I
trying
think
to
the getting out of bed is more a case by case maybe symptom rather than a more universal one. I would say helplessness is more common
what do you
than the
think is
getting
like
out
a
of bed.
universal symptom then? Just like the helplessness in itself, or is there like some others as
I
well?
would say that helplessness, I don't think there is any one universal symptom, but there's definitely ones that are more applicable than others, like helplessness, I think.
What are some obscure or like some pretty out there coping mechanisms that you've seen? Because like
Um,
you've got like different ones like drugs and whatnot to escape from the experience or to escape from the suffering that depression of and helplessness that you feel. Is there like some really out there coping mechanisms that you've seen or that you think is weird?
I don't think any reaction is weird that that classifies itself as a coping mechanism. I think all of them are. It's weird. I don't want to say like justified, just more like understandable when you have depression. There isn't anything that's too out there.
So would you
Uh,
describe people as like trying to find a coping mechanism that will work for them? Is that really all depression is? And like the helplessness feeling? Your best remedy for that is to go figure like a good coping mechanism for the problem. How do you even deal with the problem? Is there any way to deal with the problem
it's weird
directly?
when you say deal with the problem because it some like I explained like numbness. It'll feel like the best way to deal with the problem is to not deal with it sometimes. So another coping mechanism might even be to not do anything, right? Um I think addiction, like you said, drugs, but even like video game addiction, uh, food addiction, maybe binge eating. Um, those are all like coping mechanisms or consequences of depression.
Right. Yet some people, what I've seen, is that some people like their relationship with some of those coping mechanisms end up being what causes them to go further into depression. But then you see some other ones, like some people take exercising and working out to like a whole other level, or they take like a hobby that they like just binge and they're able to make something out of it. And that like gets them out of the state or like the negative state of
Funk.
mind.
Yeah.
I guess that's interesting. Do you just like continue going after different hobbies that you're interested in or that you're willing to go into? Or I guess I don't even know how like some of those activities end up being like a forefront solution for the problem. Like drugs, for example, it just like I think you try it and then you just continue doing it, hoping that it'll like get better. And maybe it does like temporarily, as I think a lot of people have voiced their experiences over like drug abuse and whatnot. Is that it ends up being just like a temporary solution, but a terrible long term solution. And actually like detrimental to other factors of their long term existence. So how do you like but people aren't willing to change like what like works in the short term. Same with
Right.
like the binge eating and whatnot. But how do you make that association that the long term is worth it when you don't even think that the short term is worth it? And how do
Like
you
the
like
long
choose?
term.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it was just that I was gonna continue on like a different thought, but I'd rather stick on the thought instead.
Well, it's weird because if you embark on a hobby, it's this weird limbo of subjectivity, like whether or not it's healthy for you. Like obviously, binge eating is not. It's not a healthy outlet, nor is uh like drug abuse, right?
Right.
But like you said, there are some people that could, I don't know, maybe they funnel it through. Uh, I don't know anyone that's had depression and that's gotten better only by like say just working out or it's a it's so psychological. It's
Right.
so neurological too. So um,
Yeah, I watched, or it's not that I watched it, but I like saw a small comic on what was it? I saw a small comic that like described a woman's image of herself like looking at the mirror, and she was like at a bigger weight. And so like the thought was that after the transformation that she would like be better if she lost a bunch of weight. And the comic was revealing of that you do not feel better after after losing weight, that your mood doesn't just drastically change, which I think is connected to that. But I think what you end up experiencing through a transformation like that is a control that you haven't like invested in. So I think when you invest in that level of control over yourself, I think you end up having a different perspective on what matters to you. And I think that should be inspiring for you to go seek out different activities that you also have control over that impact your existence overall.
yeah, I agree, absolutely. Um, yeah, because depression is like, I guess another feeling would be that lack of control, that lack of feeling like you can change yourself or the things that happen to you.
Right. I think it's I don't know why it was there was a lot of people in the comments who had like voiced different experiences on the matter. Like they had gone through a transformation themselves, or like a body transformation, and after the fact they didn't experience the same um, experience that the comic was portraying, which was, you change yourself for the better and you don't feel good about it, or you don't think that like that fixes the problem. But maybe the person who like wrote the comic was, would you say they did like the self-reflection process, like just like, I don't know, thoroughly, if they really can't claim that, like, I mean, of course they can't claim that their depression was fixed. I think that's a pretty easy one to figure out. But would they
Right.
say, are they like disregarding the idea that they became better, or that they were better off making that change for themselves versus not?
Um, I think it's a weird matter of perspective. Like the unhealthy way, from what I've seen or like heard of, like from from my therapist and other other things on this topic. Like if we're relating it to working out, you don't embark on a workout or weight loss journey and you don't tell yourself, you're not supposed to at least tell yourself, hey, I'm going to be happy once I've lost this weight. Gotta, then you're already setting yourself up not only for failure but for dissatisfaction because it's a long process. You're it's this weird limbo of you're setting expectations for what's already going to happen when it hasn't happened yet. So if, like you said, happy, or if you don't have, if your goal is to not have depression because by the end of you working out or you reaching your goal you're going to be happy, well, you can't, you can only premeditate so much in your head before you've just got to do it and not set that expectation up for yourself. I feel like I veered off from the question or the topic at hand, but
I guess I think myself as well, because I, truthfully, I started trying to look up the comic itself so I could give people some actual context as to what I was referencing. But
yes,
um,
I'll be back in 5. Hold on.
sure. I think the toxic expectations. Well, okay. I guess you have to define what like toxic expectations even are, because to me I think expectations is like equivalent to toxic, but it's like, especially, okay, the reason why it's toxic is because when you have expectations of yourself to meet like a specific standard. So if you wanted to lose like 50 pounds, and then therefore you have this image that the outcome will be not only you like at like losing 50 pounds, but that you'll be happier as well. I think the expectation that like you need to do this in order to achieve the outcome is toxic, because it's not a realistic expectation to have of yourself. And I think some people go out there saying like, yeah, I can lose 50 pounds. I'm not saying that you can't, but it's the idea that you'll also be, that you're like holding yourself to that standard. And whether or not you want, well, I don't know. I think it's toxic that you would hold yourself to something when you're not guaranteed the outcome. All of the outcome of what you perceive is going to be coming your way if you like do the journey. Because then you're just holding yourself hostage over a situation where you're not guaranteed anything, but you're still going to like hold yourself to the journey on the way there.
Yes.
I don't know how much of
Oh,
that you heard, but
you make total sense. I heard all of it because I had my headset on. But
oh.
Um,
I don't
no,
even
that makes
think I
complete
worded it.
sense.
I don't know if
No,
I
no,
even
no, that
worded
was
it
good.
the right way. Like the toxic expectations is that like I don't think I described it well enough. It's like it's not. There's no telling that the outcome is gonna come out that way, and you're holding yourself hostage over a belief that the outcome will be like you happier. I guess that would you say that's like the toxic part of that? I don't even know if that's the right way to word that.
It can also be dangerous because a lot of the times we'll set expectations for ourselves that are all too just like a bit unachievable, and that's just enough to put us over the edge of okay, well I'm setting myself up for failure, right? Which is why a lot of people don't go through with their New Year's resolutions because it's not, you know, they don't map it out well enough or don't make it like realistic. It's this weird balance of being realistic but also making it like challenging, and it's like not easy but hard. It's that weird. Yeah.
So if I said as like a New Year's resolution that I wanted to do like 20 push-ups every day, would you
Okay. Yeah.
consider that a toxic expectation?
Not at all. Only because it's extremely detailed and there's no room for interpretation.
If I mess it up, is that just me not doing it? Or rather is that like should I be holding myself responsible for not like upkeeping the resolution?
Well, it's this weird. It's weird because you take responsibility for these things, right? You should because it's only you that's in control of something like that. Unless, like, say you have depression, right? Maybe that's not something that's within your control, but you are responsible, but you are also valid for maybe waking up one day either forgetting or not feeling like it, right? Because of, you know, like depression is this neurological chemical imbalance in your brain. Can you is depression you? I guess is what the another discussion we could delve into. Is depression of the self or is depression, external of the self? And this gets into a whole other psychological discussion. But aside from that, if you don't do those 20 push-ups one day, you are responsible for that. But say if you have depression and that depression affects that very thing, you are also valid in feeling the way that you do. You wake up on the wrong side of bed, have a bad night, or even just wake up, have a bad morning.
So what does that mean towards the responsibility you should feel towards the resolution? If you have like validity in like the status going into the responsibility of not tending to the responsibility, how much of those I think some people will consider those excuses because they always think, or it's not that they always think. At one time, past Spencer thought that he had control over the responsibilities regardless of the status of the day by day,
State of mind,
yeah,
or yeah.
state of mind. So, how would you convince someone that the status of the day by day is an actual valid excuse? Like what constitutes as a valid excuse and which what isn't?
I don't think there is. I think that in and of itself is a valid excuse. I think if someone. That's like.
Do you think
That's almost like.
excuse is even the right word here?
I don't think it is, actually. Because it sounds like you're escaping responsibility, right?
Right.
When in reality, if you have depression and you choose, you're you're not choosing, you're not with 100% of your being choosing to not do those 20 push-ups. And if you think back to yourself, oh, hey, there isn't going to be an ounce of you that isn't already like, I should have done those 20 push ups. Not 100% of yourself is going to be like, okay, F the 20 push ups for today. Because, whatever. There's always going to be a push and pull. And a lot of that push when you have, or a lot of that pull when you have depression is, I'm not going to do those 20 push ups. And once again, that's valid because that's not something, you know, sometimes it may seem out of control.
So in terms of hierarchy of voices that you should listen to, should it be like the day voice that is within the context of when that responsibility needs to be taken place, and then the oath to the responsibility afterwards, or should it be the other way around? Should your oath to the responsibility be the like deciding voice in how you should feel towards the responsibility or not doing it over the like your day by day context state of mind?
It
I
is
guess the way
this
you described
weird.
it.
I know what you mean. Um, it's weird because we have this weird ability as humans to be like meta within our own minds. We can, I'd say, the average human being has a good sense of morality and values. You can look at something almost impartially, even if it is you don't do the 20 push-ups. Like 3 days later, something tells you, oh, I really should have done those push-ups, even though the days leading up to that you didn't. Um, you didn't think that, nor did you take accountability or responsibility for that. It's it's this weird feeling of what really is right for you and what. So I guess the oath, right? And it's this weird subjectivity. Like, did you take that oath in a clear state of mind? Obviously, you still have depression, so wouldn't that still affect you? Wouldn't that still be a voice or an influencer when you made that oath that is seemingly bulletproof to what values you hold, right? And I guess you could look at it from the meta point of your mind and be like, oh, hey, that is something I want for myself. That's not influenced by depression. I think that's something you can address. Maybe not always, because you're not always in a clear state of mind or in a clear state to receive or address certain responsibilities that you assigned from the get go. But if you can look at that oath and be completely impartial to that decision and say that that decision is inherently and I guess objectively healthy for you, then yeah, I would take that oath voice
Some
as
perspective.
priority.
Right, right. Some perspective that I had over the toxic, or like a realization I had over you talking about that. About the reason why I chose the word toxic is because there's a difference between the context of you when making the oath versus you like in the process of fulfilling it. And so I think in the process of fulfilling it, your state of mind as an individual can change to anything at any of the ranging states of mind that you can have. And so I think that toxic nature of it is like really disservicing yourself in the future, not knowing if you can fulfill the oath under the conditions of which you are for that day. So in the future, if you end up like I don't know, perhaps the day that you did make the oath, you ended up like I don't know, maybe you were just like in a good spot, and then like a year down the line or 6 months down the line, you end up like falling into like depressive habits and whatnot. And so fulfilling the oath becomes less of a uh, manageable task or a manageable responsibility that you can keep fulfilling. And I think the toxicity of it is not when you make like oaths like that, you're not really servicing yourself for all the range of like Spencers that you can from myself, all the range of Spencers that I could be like 6 months down the line.
Right.
And if it ends up, I think a part of the oath needs to encompass the different mindsets that you could have in the future. Like, oh, maybe this may not work out because, I'll give myself some leeway on fulfilling the responsibility in case like I fall into some depression or some seasonal depression. Um, but yeah, I think part of the oath that you need to also have like definitive um, details on is like if the responsibility can't be attended to, then for like XYZ, then how do you still deal with that responsibility without like feeling the guilt in the moment of not fulfilling it in the future?
Allow your space for allow space for failure. 'Cause failure is the best teacher.
Why don't people teach that? Or do people teach that?
I think. Ooh, I could rant about the. I could always rant about the U.S. education system not being forgiving for failure. Um, but I think trying to think of if I was taught that too, and I was by my parents, which is why I idolize them, and which you know acceptance of failure is so important, especially on any maybe depressive episode or depressive journey, right? Because if you don't accept that you failed, then you're going to be stuck in this negative mindset of, oh hey, you're trash, you didn't do this thing, and it has a domino effect. um and this is why I also really enjoy a lot of like modern teachings, like, okay, hey, like a lot of like college professors I've had over the years have the double, the two homework assignment, um I guess two homework assignment like grading system, where you are given full credit for an honest first attempt on every problem, and you can go back and correct those problems for partial to full credit, right? So that allows a forgiveness of failure, and it allows the student an opportunity to reflect, which is something that we could also do in our own respective journeys, like when you don't do the 20 push-ups. Um, and you could argue, that's there's this weird balance of, oh, okay, but the student could just give you BS for this assignment and then copy down the solution or corrections for this other homework and be done with it. Yeah, but you could also argue, okay, well, the exam is worth a majority or at least half of your grade. You you can get the homework all done, but you're not, are you really learning anything? So I guess in the end, it really discourages coasting, right? But I don't think in like high school or middle school there's not a lot of either forgiveness or leeway of failure. You typically have like what, a talk with a teacher, principal. I actually feel like it's most acceptable in um, elementary school, because your elementary school teachers are always going to have you have the parent teacher conferences and whatnot. So
I would actually
I
credit.
don't think we teach it enough, but
Right,
yeah,
right. You mean like teach the.
failure acceptance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, I know for at least my own story, my family usually came up like on top. There were certain thresholds that I couldn't cross, and that was like the defining moment of a failure in itself. It's like if I ever resorted to drugs, it was like, I was pretty much shunned for the rest of my life over something like that, or at least the life that I could like perceive of. So if I ever
Hmm.
like joined in and did like drugs with any of the high school peeps, I would just be, I my parents wouldn't look at me the same if I ever did that. And so that's like a kind of moment of I was so afraid of failure that I wasn't even willing to humor like any ideas of pursuing like a failing route. And that failing route being one that's been defined by like family norms. So
Hmm.
in terms of like exposing yourself to failure, it just ended up not being, it didn't end up being the case. So in my family for the most part, I mean, there was like academic failures and whatnot, but usually you take a look at like the more severe failing conditions, and then you idolize those on a, well, on an unhealthy scale. So yeah, my exposure to like being okay with failure was pretty minimal, because there it just always felt like there was, you could always perceive of like the worst kind of failure possible. And since that standard was already like set up for me with drugs and whatnot from the family, it ended up being like, or even like failing grades, but I was never close to that. Nor did I like even openly think about failing classes on purpose. So,
Mm.
but do you think that's like a school, do you think school influences are more towards that like idea of I guess failure, or like accepting failures, like, or that you can't accept failure, like who actually has this like who has that influence more?
Like you're talking like school versus family.
Yeah.
Um, I think they have. It's so situational because you can have like say a poor family support system, and maybe you have like friends, or you have a strong school support system. It's still, you need one of those, right? And I'd argue that family is the most important thing, but that's, you know, that's that's based on my upbringing. Like, my family raised me on very strong family values: stick together, support each other unconditionally, um, always be ready to get someone else out of a rut. And failure is weird because I want to bring up that failure can still happen without, I guess that's a double negative, with like an enormous amount of effort too, right? You can have people who are trying and they can still fail, whether or not that um effort threshold, I guess, is met. But you could also have the opposite. You could have people that barely try in school, right? You always had those kids that are just gifted, right? I wasn't the gifted kid. I always had to try my ass off to get a minus on a test, but someone didn't study the night before, has gotten C's on all the homeworks. Oh, they aced the exam. Okay, that's just how the world works. It's so, yeah, it's very conditional. There's no blanket statement um, for defining categories of failure. But I think what my family raised me on was, if you are not trying, then that's something that needs to be discussed, rather than, you know, I'm still failing, but I'm trying my best here, which is, I can think of. So my family moved a lot when I was a kid, and one of the things that I remember specifically is I lived in, I think it was like Marysville for a good period of time, and I'd built up, this strong friend group. I had my day ones, and my dad's work was bringing him somewhere else, so we had to move cities. So I was an A student throughout all of sixth grade, and we were moving in the middle of 7th grade, and I just started getting C's across the board. Arguable failure, arguable not, whatever. C is still passing, elementary school. And my parents like saw this, right? And they saw that I was still trying, but there was this, you know, almost uncontrollable emotional response from moving away that caused my grades to tank. You know, there's this like related to depression, this helplessness feeling that, oh, this isn't going to matter, even though the grades are going to transfer. My 7th grade-year-old mindset is this isn't going to matter anymore. And I didn't stop trying, but I, you know, the same level of trying, the same, you know, might equate to more failure, which, you know, wasn't the case. I'm a kid. I can't control that my dad's moving us away, right? So, you know, there's no set uh, guideline on what kind of failure it is.
How do you overcome that? Like on an individual level, you have all these external forces that are contributing to your internal expectations of how you should behave. But how do you
Right.
end up overcoming those external forces and then coming to a self realization of what actually is important? Like, how
Like
did
you
you go
start with
from that?
reflection.
Okay.
This is something that's a little easier the older you get, right? Because as a kid, you're like, why should I meditate? why should I why should I reflect? Right? As a kid, you're not thinking of, okay, well, this is what I'm learning. As a kid, you're just learning. Um, so as you get older, right, to break to break, I argue to break a lot of habits, and this is something I've learned in just about every like decent therapist that'll tell you this. You've got to just reflect, acknowledge it, and then just keep acknowledging it. And that acknowledgement in and of itself is chipping away at whatever habit you want to break, whatever um, mindset you want to change. I think you start there, and then whatever issue you might have is it should come with help, but it should still manifest itself through that self reflection, meditative progress that you've had. I
Right.
don't know.
Okay.
I know where to start. I don't know where to to go
Oh.
though. Sometimes, right?
Yeah. So with I guess one comment. Well, I have multiple comments. The first comment I have is it gets like the finding out your own individual values and ethics usually come along with the as you age, as you had mentioned. And I think part of my perspective on that is that as like a kid, or rather when you're born, you're trying to figure out like the environment that you're a part of, and so you find out like the surroundings of which you're involved with and try to make sense and your own spot as to how you fit along with that. And I think as you go as you age on, you start to develop other regions of your identity, and I think that ends up being like one of those things. You have to come to some conclusion about different expectations of you and what expectation you should even have of yourself, because as you grow older, you start to realize that's a control that you can have. That's like another added control that you can have over yourself. And personally, I think that's probably the biggest control you should have over yourself. Is understanding like what expectations you should even have of yourself. But then part of defining those, or as you're experimenting with defining those, you end up coming across unhealthy expectations, but you only model those off of other people who had expectations of you. So then you end up finding the balance of what is like a healthy expectation of yourself and what isn't. And so, in terms of like the self-reflecting process, I don't actually meditate myself, but I guess you could say like part of the process could be considered like meditation. I think I just end up thinking a lot over stupid shit. But it's usually just internally and not without like poses or like
You
some
don't have to meditate with poses.
or some like process, breathing process as to
Breathing, yeah.
yeah, into clearing my mind and thinking about stuff. So, but I definitely think the self-reflection process is usually a start because in the end you have to understand that the processes that you're trying to go through to optimize like how you're existing with the environment around you may or may not be efficient enough for you to continue going, and sometimes it's that bad that I think you end up with depression because of that. And so some reform needs to happen, and that usually starts with the reflection process.
Wasn't there a study done a while back that I don't know if it was a study, but it was a lot of therapists reflecting on their um, their patients that have had depression that are actually very so, most of those that have depression are very very I don't want to say they're very descriptive and very analytic kinds of people,
I've been
and they
yeah,
can yeah yeah right
one one word that I was told is that, or not one word, but like I remember a similar talk, and it was that like depressive, not candidates, depressive clients ended up being like more realistic in perspective versus
hmm
other people. I don't know if that's the one that you were relating that to, but
definitely
yeah, it was their grip on reality was more objective than other people's like subjective uh, like description of I guess the world. I guess I don't know. I'm definitely not doing the study any justice, but that was kind of the gist of the report.
yeah, which makes you think, right? Like, if only there weren't that chemical imbalance in your brain, a lot of depressive people have that capacity to be very self-reflective and very productive in their thoughts, right?
Right.
Um,
I mean, it does get them pretty far, just in the
right,
negative direction.
in the wrong way.
Oops.
Um, you know, what else is on your list?
Oh, I've got. I haven't even gone through like. I don't
We're
think
like
we've
the
even
first two
hit
bullet
on
points.
anything yet. I think one to talk about though is how taboo is the topic, because I remember like, well, it's not that I remember, but I've had people say their experiences over like depression and whatnot, the kinds of therapy or I guess services out there to handle people with depression is like I guess vastly changed and in some generational or some generations ago. Like before, it was just nobody talked about it, and now to me at least, it seems like the like a hot new buzzword that everyone has to pitch in with their own like internal struggles. It's like yes, everyone goes through internal struggles, which isn't to downplay your own personal experience, but you know we all
I
got shit we
think
go through. Like I have to eat
right.
food every day, the same way you have to eat food every day.
Oh no, eating food. Oh no,
Oh no.
the
So
dreaded eating of food. Um, I like the direction that the public has taken towards addressing depression because there are a lot of very oh, I can speak on this, I guess. There are a lot of very Asian traditional Asian views on depression, and they're very I don't want to say I'll say it uneducated, unaware perspectives on depression, and not even I don't want to say back then like I'm dating this traditional view, but if you back, as I say back then, if you had depression, right, or committed, or had someone, a member in the family, commit suicide, your family was viewed as weak, right? Because you know, there's a very old way of viewing depression is that it was controllable, which for the most part, without external without external help, it was seen as just stop being sad. And that's not. I'm not even saying that's just in Asian culture. I'm saying that's in all cultures for how we viewed depression back then. It was, you know, like I said, it's weird to say uneducated when a lot of science has come a long way for analyzing what depression is, but
It just wasn't
it was,
accommodating from.
yeah, it wasn't not adaptive. There's a very specific word I'm looking for, and it's not coming to me. It wasn't, it wasn't advanced. It wasn't modern. So, like, you know, speaking on my own experience with 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 suicide, um, when my sister passed, I think my dad took it the hardest in the direction of he might have had other family members see it in a negative light because you know maybe he carries that. I don't I don't want to say if depression is genetic. I think I've heard that it can be. I don't quote me on it. I haven't done any research on that. But if someone, you know, he carried that my dad carried that burden of feeling like his family is weak or that he didn't do his job to accommodate or to account for my sister's apparent potential depression. So the way we view depression nowadays is very, it's more progressive than ever before, and I actually really like it.
I think something still needs to be said about the kind of control that the network has over someone in like someone in your own network has depression. How much of your own contributions can help them like stay within a stable state, and I like
Yes.
there is pressure that comes along with that, and it just sucks that there are like external people outside of the network who want to blame others for this depression in someone else in the network who might seemingly have more control. And that's just, I don't know. It's like to some degree I feel the same kind of guilt towards some people who have like passed in the past, unfortunately. Um, like there were some people in high school who ended up taking their own life, and every once in a while I'm reminded by the guilt of, well, I could have done this, I could have done that. And rightfully so. You had the in-network control over someone else to change the direction of where they were going. Or at least you'd like to think that. But there's no definitive amount of control that you have over someone else in that way or in that light. But you just feel
Hmm.
like there is. So it's hard.
Right.
Would you say that the topic itself is like, would you say people talking about the topic is for the better, and is it useful in terms of like its capacity to be like useful to other people? Do you think it's like, give me a percentage amount of like how much the discussion is utilized towards a useful direction of how to view like depression as a topic?
I think generally, even just the awareness of it is a net positive. I would say, because there's not a lot of Like you could argue that it's very different from discussing the misinformation of COVID, right? In depression, there's not a lot of people out there that are um, like spreading the viewpoint that, oh, just feel better, forehead. You know, I think a lot of people are gearing towards that progressive viewpoint that it is something nigh uncontrollable from you know the support group or the person themselves that have it. So you know that reach out, that acknowledgement that it exists beyond most levels of control it's still like healthy because we're very encouraging about people reaching out. So I think inevitably it is a good thing that we're constantly discussing it and we're still researching it, right? Scientists are still trying to understand it because, the brain's complex.
I think I've definitely not given the awareness port or that like the change in awareness has brought a lot of great like discussion and I guess general cognitive um, well yeah I don't know just like awareness to the topic has enabled other people to understand victims better
Hmm.
where I feel like victims weren't very understood in the way that they should have been understood, myself included. But I guess with the question, I know when I wrote this point, I wasn't thinking about like the changes in awareness and the net positives of those awareness changes. I guess I was more trying to figure out if you thought if the discussion now is could it be better, or do you think it's good enough?
I think it's weird to say if it could be better because we don't know the results of what it would look like if it were better, unless it's like, oh, hey, less people commit suicide. That's like a direct result. I don't know what it would take to achieve, a lower suicide rate. I think I still think we're doing the best we can. I mean, I could post more on my social media about, you know, uh, awareness, suicide prevention, all that. But with the way it's normalized now, I think it's in one of the better states than it could be in a different timeline or universe, right? Um,
Right. I
and
guess with
maybe that's my circle,
no, you're right.
right? My
No, you're
influential circle. That's as far as I can take it. Maybe in, I don't know, some other Asian country it might be a different story.
I see. So you feel like the role of making it more of a or like spreading awareness isn't really up to you because it's fulfilled by as a collective responsibility. Other people in the collection have taken it up, and therefore you don't see as much of a need to contribute when your outreach wouldn't extend beyond what the collective has already like spread awareness to.
Well, it's this weird. I might argue that I should reach out more and post more to spread awareness, right? But there are a lot of people, yes, like in my circle, like my parents, that are very outspoken on what depression is and how to support the people in your network. So I wouldn't say that I feel that responsibility isn't on me, but it's also, you know, it's also my weird relationship with social media that I don't post a lot. I just lurk. So
How are you fulfilling
it's
that? And well, I think that's a method for some people to spread awareness. Is there
right,
like other
absolutely.
ways for that you do it?
Well, like this podcast, I would say that this episode, I don't know the traction this episode. I don't know how many people are going to view it, listen, but any level of exposure on the topic is generally helpful. It's you know it's a weird thing because you can only assess so much of how much you're helping the public on the topic. I'd say people that have like a bigger audience might be a bit more um, useful, right? There was that one celebrity I don't know a while back that like talked about, not they didn't even have depression, just like depressive episodes that caused discussion on depression, right? And they kind of were this like them speaking out about it was, I think, like not inevitably, but generally helpful to the public because maybe it hits someone, some watered down place, they're feeling bad. You'd like to think in the general sense of the universe that they did good by acknowledging their feelings of depression and depressive episode. That maybe it did make a difference, right? But there were the people that are criticizing them, right? They're like, oh, you can be so depressed with all that cash that you're making from that movie you just made, and I'm like, that's insensitive. That's
They don't get
that's
it.
yeah, they don't get it.
Clearly.
They're
Thanks for
they're
announcing
just
yourselves.
thank you for telling me that you're insecure about money. That's great. But there's only so much, and I don't think unless you are like maybe a nonprofit or uh, some sort of organization that aims to cure these things, like reduce the suicide rate. Um, it's self-assessed how much you feel responsible for spreading the word.
Interesting. Do you think if you were given the opportunity, okay, do you think it's your responsibility when given the opportunity to like show aware or to provide awareness that you take it
What does an opportunity look like?
like this? Like I'm
Like
sure other
this?
people who viewed like social media as an opportunity to spread awareness like take up, and I mean obviously the ones who like share the posts are the ones who like capitalize on the opportunity because they see it as such. But
Right.
then there's us who are more reserved on social media, don't really see it as an opportunity to spread awareness, but perhaps it's more of an opportunity for something else. And instead there's better ways to like to capitalize on opportunities in a more meaningful way to us to spread
Right.
awareness on like depression. Now,
I
I
think
figured like
if
this
you
would
have the
be a good
opportunity,
spot.
take it. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I just think with like the like when you describe like a celebrity talking about like depression and the kind of outreach that it has for other people, would that discredit the kind of service that other people are trying to do on social media? Like say like anyone from our high school or like any one of your friends like chose to do like a post on depression awareness. Is that even though they didn't have like as much of an audience like with their outreach, does that mean that their attempt to spread awareness was any less than that of someone who is on like a show and is a celebrity spreading that kind of awareness through that media?
They all have their own, respective um, value. I think because I don't view it as any one audience is like yes, you could say the audience is bigger, but you're still any difference is still a difference, regardless of maybe the value that that difference might have. You're still making an impact, and that's still worthwhile. You know, because maybe they have different networks, right? by statistically, they probably do have different networks, and they're reaching out to someone that is different and not mutual between their groups. So it's, yes, there's a difference in, sure, the value of it, but it's also chance. Like, this celebrity could reach out and there could be 0 people. It's very small, but it could be 0 people that they reach out to that they affected, and that person with, say, 500 followers on Instagram or something could reach out, and they could reach out to 10 people. That's more. So it's there's no like real way of assessing the value of outreach or awareness, but you know,
Do you
no
think
one's gonna knock on their door and be like, "Hey, you cured my depression. Thanks, man."
right, right. Do you think awareness needs to be like a repeated activity?
Yes,
So would you
absolutely.
say that the intersectionality in audiences is less important, but rather the reminder to the people who are already a part of the audience is like equally is an equal responsibility to upkeep.
Yes, I would say actually that the point you bring up changes my perspective on celebrities with an audience, because they might have more new followers, and if they were to repeat their reaching about, you know, that might make a bigger impact, because you know they're seeing that more and more.
Right. Okay. Cool.
We're humans of habit, so if we see something repeatedly, we will make a difference on whatever whatever person decided to remind us of that.
Okay. We got like a bunch of other topics and I think it's already been an hour.
Yeah, we
It's
can
not
we
like
can
not like topics, but definitely some other bullet points. I don't know which ones
blurbs.
you thought were like most important to you that stood out.
Um, like a quick touch on therapy. I think therapy is generally good. It's not for everybody, but I think it's a good outlet, and it's especially strong for people that don't have a strong network. So, or a strong like support system. So, I would encourage people to do therapy even if they didn't have depression, because like I'm not diagnosed with depression. I've had depressive episodes, but like therapy is, I've never it's like working out. I've never felt bad or unproductive going to therapy. Unless it
Interesting.
was, unless it was like, maybe you're going to a first therapy session, you're trying to feel out, you got to find your right therapist, or maybe therapy's not for you at all. But generally I would say it's a good place to be.
I've actually felt unproductive during therapy sessions. But the
Yeah.
reason for that is because my goal going into therapy was completely wrong with what therapy actually is. So my question to you was like, or was going to be, what kind of misconceptions do you see with like therapy as a service for people with depression?
I think the biggest misconception is that their depression will be cured with through therapy. That's not always the case.
Right. So what kind of process or what kind of progress should you see through this like service?
I think therapy definitely helps you with your, like I said earlier, you're starting. So like it helps with your mindfulness. It helps you acknowledge and validate your feelings. And validation of feelings is something that's so hard to do in the modern day, and it's so it's so tricky, because it's balancing, once again, it's going back to this balance of responsibility versus acceptance. A lot of us don't accept our feelings. A lot of people with depression, I would argue, don't accept. You know, maybe some of them don't even accept themselves. So Therapy
Right.
helps you analyze your lack of acceptance and or lack of mindfulness in your own life. And I would say, a lot of people think that your therapist just repeats things back to you all the time when they're going there, and maybe they have that misconception, right? They're not being mindful of their time in therapy at all. So, don't always go into therapy thinking it's going to be um, varying. Well, it is going to be varying levels of productivity, but don't go into it thinking you're gonna be like cured, right?
Right. I guess tying that back to what we've already, or to something that we've talked about earlier, which is like the self reflection process, is a good way to analyze your own, like, I guess, proof of identity. Or, yeah, to like just, yeah, to figure out your identity and whatnot, and also like try to evaluate different dimensions of your life and to see how things could be better, or analyze it for the worse, which would be to really humble yourself back down to the idea that you're nothing special and you're just like a individual, just a pawn to the whole system that you've been a part of your whole life. I think what therapy has really taught me is to like start being self-analytical from like an objective as I could be, like try to analyze yourself on a like objective level, which is nearly impossible, is really what I found out. The most
Mm-hmm.
objective you can get is through your friends. I think your friends can give you like the most objective but subjective view of yourself. And I think trying to find people who can evaluate you on a very objective level is hard to find. And once you
Yep.
find people who are able to give you that feedback towards yourself, you can start to learn that their words are probably better than your own
Your
subjective
own
words,
thoughts.
yeah, of your
Yeah.
own self. And so I think therapy exposes you to the idea that other people will listen, or that there are people who can listen and will generate different perspectives based on the experiences you have to share. And sometimes they'll actually like they'll even tie things back to when you were a child, or like different experiences that you've had, to try and retrain you of the different perspectives that you should have of those experiences. And so I think the therapy does a good job of doing that, but your measurement going into therapy needs to be the right one, because what you're
Right.
not going to get is your depression cured. I think what you're going to get is a new perspective of how to like continue moving through life with new sets of lens. And I think you're also given the opportunity to learn about how to be self-reflective through the model that they choose to analyze you.
Through their moderation
Yeah.
or through their facilitation, I guess, because you can only spend so much time in your own head before you draw a circle.
Right.
So, yeah,
Cool. I've also got antidepressants up there. I don't know if have you ever used like antidepressants as a method?
I have not because I haven't been clinically assessed for
Nice.
it. So,
I have.
um,
Man, do those numb you the fuck out. You don't feel any
it's a
happiness
different
or
feeling.
sadness. It's just you just feel you feel nothing. But that's better than like feeling suffering and whatnot. Which, I mean, you
Right.
could say like a nothingness feeling is even worse than like
Is also
feeling
suffering.
suffering.
Right.
Yeah. So, but it was just like you lost the capacity to feel. Actually, that's probably a better way to word what antidepressants did. It's like I didn't feel like happiness, but I didn't feel like sadness either. So,
Hmm. That seemed to be the case for another friend that I had. That same deal as what you
right,
experienced.
right.
Yeah,
What
experienced
about
the same.
group therapy? Have you considered that?
I've a therapy specifically. I mean, it depends. We had a group grief therapy. I don't. It's not for me. I think my friends understand me enough to where I feel comfortable sharing with them rather than sharing with a bunch of strangers or sharing with an individual professional. So it may it may work for some people. Yeah, I think it works better for people that don't have particularly strong support system, like a good group of friends they can go to talk or to vent. But that's anecdotal. That's situational.
I know for me, I'd probably feel invalidated if people didn't like respond well enough. And it's like a group setting too. So not only do you have one other person who, I mean, everyone there is there for like each other, right? But who's to
Hmm.
say like Timmy in the furthest area in the corner from me is gonna like understand or reciprocate my story in the way that I want it to be like reciprocated. So
Right.
like group therapy, you have different signals of interest coming from different people. And I think that can be an invalidating experience or a validating experience based on your standard of where you want to see other people interested in what you have to say.
Hmm.
But I'm sure that's definitely not how people view group therapy as a whole. I'm sure they just like gain strength from listening to the suffering of others and then find like some inspiration within themselves to overcome the same obstacle everyone else does. But for me, I see it more as like a that's an equal opportunity to be invalidated from from like multiple people rather than just one. Whereas if I think it was just one and we engaged in like a one-on-one, like with like a therapist, I'm obviously paying for the service, but part of the paying for the service is that they'll like unconditionally listen to what I have to say and give like their best input. So
Hmm.
I think that negates the kind of social pressure that or the social understanding that I see from when I interact with other people. It's like a factor I don't have to think about. Okay, I think I'll end on this one and then yeah, I guess we'll call it from there. Um is there light at the end of the tunnel? This is more like a bigger question though.
This is you want to end on this?
Yeah, I was going to end on that.
Okay, it's well. Even then, you could ask, "What is the light at the end of the tunnel?" Not depression. Is
Ooh,
that the light?
that's part of where the question was going to.
Okay. I this is something I don't have research or knowledge on. Some people get their depression cured, some don't, right? It's not like it's like a universal. There is no universal cure for depression, right? Um, I don't know. Maybe you can speak on this better because I know you're in a better spot than you were.
I don't think any of the thoughts that you had during depression are really proven wrong. I think some of the things of the humble perspectives that I had towards like my own existence that ended up like causing depression within me of I'm just like another useless cog in the machine. Like I'm pretty like tradable for anyone else in terms of network. Like if I were to die like when I was 19, who would even miss me? Family who I've pretty much given up on. Family, the one being, or the one group of people who like caused the majority of my suffering. So I have like resentment towards them already. Like how much should I even care about those kinds of people? And like you end up having that humble perspective for a while and then just all of a sudden everything all your consumer habits, your provider habits become pretty meaningless after you do some like self-reflection of over different dimensions of what should be meaningful to you. And then you come to the conclusion that none of it is really meaningful. And so from that point on, you just like you're pretty much at your wit's end and nothing really matters. But some part of you just like comes into I don't know. You understand how little control you have over like different dimensions of life.
Hmm.
But then you go to therapy and it's like I don't really credit therapy for much of it, but I will say that they at least taught me to be to at least give myself a chance. And I think the important takeaway from that was, even though they didn't word it out for me, I think I ended up having to word this out myself, but part of their methods is to teach you the kind of control that you have, the actual control that you really have. So even though you have all these different goals and dreams of being someone in the future, when you're young and you don't understand the environment of the world very well, you're very it hits you hard when you have to humble yourself back down to, okay, there's, I may have not gotten into Stanford, but statistically, like what, 99% of applicants generally don't. And so, as much as you want to be the 1%, and that's just a made up statistic, anyways, it's probably like 10% of applicants end up getting it. But not being a part of the 10% or the elite is just like, you can dream about being the 10%, but there's 90% of people who get their dreams crushed. And it sucks being a part of the 90%. So, but it's like a factor that's out of your control, and as much as you want it to happen, it doesn't actually happen. But part of the light at the end of the tunnel is understanding that it's not that, like, the idea of you being able to change the world in a way that you want to can magically be rekindled by your visiting of, or from your extinguishing of depression within yourself. It's more of like you come to terms with, you come at peace with the understanding of that knowledge, and you make do with what you can in other dimensions that you can find meaning out of. And I think that's like that light at the end of the tunnel. It's like, even though there's some there's some shit on the sidewalk, you it's not really in your control that it happened.
That shit's not yours, dog.
That shit's not yours. You
You can
did
walk
your
past the
part.
shit.
Yeah. It's definitely a terrible analogy. But yeah, like the light at the end of the tunnel
It's
is
not great.
sorry. It what like
It
didn't
makes
even make
sense
sense.
though.
No, I don't even think it
It
made
makes a
sense. It
little
didn't make sense at all.
sense.
Ah, oh well. Yeah.
Depression is the shit. Don't quote that. Don't clip that.
Okay.
um, it is the shit in the analogy, yes, because it was not. It's not. Yeah, you didn't. You didn't cause it.
But yeah, I think you learn to accept the conditions as they are, and you make do with you constantly learn about the conditions of life around you. And I think as you're finding out about those conditions, you figure out what you're in control of.
Right.
And that gives you meaning.
Right.
As long as
You have control
yeah.
over, I guess, your own perspective of the world, rather than a the world outside of your existence, outside of your circle, outside of your, I don't know. Ignore me. But yeah,
What
your
do you think
perspective will change.
yeah, what do you think the light is at the end of the tunnel? Where do you see yourself, like, trajectory wise going?
I actually agree with you a lot. Um, I think, yeah, a change in perspective. And even if you don't cure it, learning to live with it is still a is still something that encompasses the light at the end of the tunnel, right? It's, you could the light is weird because your default response might be you don't commit suicide or you don't live the rest of your life out, but you know, us as humans value the it's weird, we value the number of years we live as a successful life sometimes, and that's always, I think it should be that value should be more subjective than it actually is. Um, or I guess more subjective than objective. And you know, your perspective on life doesn't need to be this. rainbows and unicorns, uh, like sunflower field of goodness and hope all the time, right? What is it? The yogis believe that life is suffering, and you know, part of their meditative practices is that you still, despite that, you are still able to live your life in a manageable, hopefully, and semi-successful manner that it doesn't always feel like suffering. So I guess that's the light, is that it doesn't always feel like suffering to you.
I've definitely taken on that perspective as well. All right.
Yeah. Not
We
every day
cool
has
with
to
that?
suck. Yeah, we cool, man.
We cool with that?
We
All right.
cool.
I guess we'll. Any last thoughts?
No, that's good.
Okay. Is there anything else that you'd actually want to hit in like another one? Say if we did this topic again, what would you want to hit?
I do. Being a part of the support system, I think, is an important one. Like you said,
Ooh,
best way to
true.
how to help other people. I would want to hit that. Um, because I have perspective on that. I'm trying to think.
I think something needs to be said about when you see someone recover from depression, what does that look like? And what do you think their like before and after status is? Because I think that plays a part of the misconception of what we talked about before, of is
Right.
there light at the end of the tunnel, and in the way that you see like someone else go through or like overcome their like depressive mindset, you know, like what kind of change actually happened before and after that, but
I
it
think you could shed a lot of light there,
probably
and I would be curious to hear your take. If we did a part two, it would be a little shorter, for
I
sure.
agree.
But
Yeah,
um,
maybe.
I think it'd be worth it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I guess we'll call it there. Thanks for listening, guys. I know Jared's been in here the whole time.
Oh, poggers, bro, Jared, big fan.
We got Isabel in here too.
Cool, cool, cool.
Isabel commented, "It's easier to get over the external factors when you're older by realizing a lot of it is out of your control. Just accepting life is gonna happen to you, and just gotta accept, or sorry, just gotta adjust what you can, or what you can control." I think you see that with a lot of people though. It's like they focus in on the different factors that they have control of, being their body for the most part, and then any kind of routine habits that they can adjust into their existence. It's the exerting of control that they have over their life. I think that's
It
what
is
gives
more
people
productive.
meaning. Yeah,
Yeah, because if you're stressing over things you can't control, you're not gonna get far.
right. Anyways, I think we'll call it there.